You know, Greg, I think that, what are you laughing about, Mr. Blood Pressure? I think that we're on a time clock, in my view. You know, we have a tendency to be reactive versus proactive. This happens in daily life. Whether it's installing a stoplight, we wait for somebody to get killed, or an incident that represents a catastrophe affects families and communities, and then we do something and say, oh, we should have had a stoplight. Why didn't we think of that? Well, nobody wanted to do this, to install that initially. We seem to dance around the conversation. We hear a lot of rhetoric from the Hill and others with respect to proposed changes. But the action is what we need to be interested in. So in my view, we need to standardize across foreign carriers, domestic providers, equally. We can all have the same set of standards, and if you want to participate, this is the minimum qualification. And if you don't, then find another business. So I think that would go, initially, would be the foundation.
But don't we have that standard now in these things we call the Federal Aviation Regulations?
Well, we have the regulations.
But isn't that the standard? Isn't one of the intents of those regulations is to provide guidance and a standard, a minimum level of safety standard?
I hope it's not the standard. I hope it's just the minimum. Because what we really do, you said it yourself when you read from the FAA's documents, that the air carrier industry is required to have the highest level of safety. That's not what the FARs give us. The FARs give us a minimum level of safety. And this airline industry in this country has long operated to much higher standards until the recent times where we've decided to go lower those standards to the minimums.
Why do you think that is? What changed all of a sudden to lower that standard?
The Deregulation Act of 1978.
What's changed? I mean, that just increased competition.
Yeah, but you had carriers coming into the business that didn't have the infrastructure and only operated to the minimum. I remember the likes of People Express. You and I remember the likes of ValueJet. There was nothing above the minimum in any of those operations. In those two operations, there was nothing above the minimums. So, you know, the FARs are the minimums. They mostly will keep you out of trouble, but they won't put you in compliance with the highest level of safety.
So, I mean, whether it's a repair station or an airline, you have a similar issue there. So how is it that we increase that level of safety in standard?
Well, right off the bat, let's talk about the air carrier and personnel. Air carriers would hire in the 90 percentile range certified mechanics. That means that they have a base level of education which will be built upon in the carrier. Repair stations, we know they don't hire them. Maybe they would if they could get the hands on the numbers, but what we've seen is that they don't hire certified mechanics. So you're telling me that if I had a repair station down the street that had 100 people in it working on an engine, to say, and we had another engine shop in the Continental Airlines that had 100 people in it, and one happens to be 90% A&Ps and one has one A&P. Is that the same level of standard?
Well, I mean, in fairness, I mean, you listened to Sarah this morning. I mean, she pulls out the book. In the book, you know, there's this training standard that they apply, 18 months of practical experience and a variety of other things. What makes that different? I mean, that is a standard. They are trained. They are a skilled, that is a skilled position. So what makes it different?
I would say that if everybody in the repair station met that minimum standard, we would be better off today than what we are, because they don't meet that minimum standard. We know they don't meet that minimum standard, and we have an FAA that's unable and unwilling, maybe in some cases, to go in and impose that standard.
Okay. So as part of the solution I'm hearing here is that people actually need to understand the standard and then be made to comply with it?
Is that to me?
That's you.
Yes.
Is
Yes.
that?
I just want, I mean, because we keep going around and around, because I don't think that anybody here, anybody can disagree that you want qualified people working on your aircraft. Obviously, you want the highest qualified people, but sorry, not everybody's going to get the highest qualified persons right off the bat. You're just not get we got to deal with reality also. We got to deal with 6,000 repair stations out there. We got to deal with 270 air carriers, I believe. And I mean, you know, we got to deal with it, and we got to be able to define what we're looking for and move forward.
Okay.
I mean, John, by the way, just one thing. The minimum standards for an air carrier are the highest degree of safety. Whether or not they meet them, John, you can roll your eyes all you want, but whether or not they meet it, that is the standard. And I also think that we need to be a little bit careful about understanding the standards from Europe. In Europe, the A&P mechanic is not enough. You have to be type rated on an aircraft. And I'm not sure if it's true in Australia, and it's also true in Canada, that they ask for type ratings on the aircraft, which I think probably most of the mechanics are, but that's not something that the FAA does here. And if we ask them to do it, then how much more resources would we need in order to ensure that they could do it? Or are we going to allow the air carriers to do it or the repair stations to do it, you know, type rate people?
That was directed to you, Steve. And, you know, what is the qualification of the mechanics in your shop? And do you have many non-certificated folks working in the business over there?
Yeah, in Australia, the guy's got to be type rated on each particular aircraft, and so I think throughout my career, I'm licensed on 4 aircraft. That's about 125 exams to get there. Lamy-Amy ratios in Australia are pretty close to 90%, I would say, of the line mechanics have got a licence on at least 1 aircraft. In the heavy maintenance facilities, we're probably looking at 30 to 50% of the people are licensed aircraft engineers, which I think is a very a key factor to Australia's aviation successes, keeping those levels up. We know that those levels aren't the same in some other countries. I've heard a few comments up here, which and there's been a bit of discussion about these books over here. As far as I can see, there's some books sitting on a table, and if someone can't read English, it's a bit difficult for him to comply with the rules that are there. If he can't read English, he can't read a maintenance manual. These are problems that we face with outsourced maintenance. And I've heard another couple of comments as well, which I think are really negative, and I think we've really got to look at the positives. One of the comments was, we know that outsourced maintenance will not go away. Well, I don't know why anyone here should be saying that outsourced maintenance will not go away. There are ways in which outsourced maintenance can disappear, and that is if you make sure that the work in the States is acquitted to a high safety standard and it is cost effective, then it will go away. We know that as the maintenance gets sucked out of Australia and the United States, the price is going to go up in Asia or wherever it might be. So I'm a little bit more optimistic than to sit here and say that outsourced maintenance will not go away.
Well, we are, but we're outsourcing approximately 10% of our maintenance if you factor in our TASL partnership. That far exceeds anybody else in this country. I don't care what type carrier you are. But that wasn't developed because we wished for it to happen. What it required was an attitude adjustment, in my view.
On whose part?
On both of our parts. On the part of the TWU and on the part of American Airlines. Their willingness to accept us as knowledgeable assets and not look at us as some impediment and some cost driver versus revenue generator shifted the paradigm. And we responded accordingly. Our members are the most talented that I've ever had the pleasure of being associated with. Their innovation, you heard Senator McCaskill commented about Local 530. That's our maintenance base in Kansas City. She's toured that floor many times. Our group up there is installing winglets on our 7.5s. We can be a preferred provider of that service. So it is not rocket science, but if you're not interested in having a civilized relationship and conversation with your workforce, then there is no opportunity.
Let me turn to Rich. I mean, Don.